Rafe Sinclair and Darius Quinn, two names that sent shivers through the streets of the UK. Masters of deception, fear, and violence, they built Britain's most dangerous gang from nothing, leaving a trail of chaos and terror wherever they went. From daring heists in London to shadowy operations across the country, their audacity seemed unstoppable. But as law enforcement closed in and betrayal lurked within their own ranks, the line between predator and prey began to blur. This is the story of ambition, cunning, and the dark empire that haunted a nation. In the early 2000s, the area around Iron Street in East London was a place many preferred to avoid. Old brick buildings stood close together, shops had broken shutters, and nights were filled with the sound of sirens. It was in this environment that Darius Finch grew up. He was not loud or aggressive, like many others around him. Instead, he watched, listened, and understood people in ways that others could not. He saw patterns, weaknesses, and opportunities. While other young men fought openly, Darius stayed in the background, observing how power really worked. He realized that violence alone did not create control. Fear did, and fear did not always require shouting or confrontation. It could be built slowly, by making the right moves at the right time, by gaining influence piece by piece. Darius started with a small group of friends who had grown tired of low-paying street jobs. They began collecting and reselling stolen phones, watches, and small electronics. The business was not big, but it was stable. They never drew too much attention, and they always made sure their sellers and buyers felt protected. Word spread that dealing with them was safe. As their reputation grew, so did their circle of influence. Darius never spoke about plans directly. He simply made sure everyone knew what was expected. Soon, a small network developed around Iron Street. Young teenagers kept lookout. Older members dealt with stolen goods. Those with cars moved materials from one part of the city to another. Darius built this without force. People joined because they believed they would benefit from being close to him. Over time, Darius began to notice patterns in the city that others ignored. He saw how abandoned warehouses could be useful. He learned which street corners had blind spots where cameras did not reach. He paid attention to which police officers took their patrols seriously, and which ones were simply waiting for their shift to end. Every detail became part of his growing map of control. But the true change came when the group encountered a rival crew that tried to take over one of Iron Street's trading routes. The rival group used threats and open violence, expecting Darius to respond the same way. Instead, Darius waited. He observed their routines, their weaknesses, and the people they trusted. Within weeks, those allies began to slowly cut ties with the rival group, frightened by subtle warnings that were never traced back to Darius directly. No major fight happened. No streets were set on fire. The rival group simply faded away because they realized they no longer had support. This moment marked the beginning of something larger. The area locals began to refer to Darius's group as the Iron Street Crew, a name that came naturally because their presence felt solid and unbreakable. Their influence spread beyond market stalls and street corners. Businesses paid quietly to avoid problems. Residents followed unspoken rules. Even those who disliked the gang remained silent, fearing what might happen if they spoke too loudly. Darius Finch had built the foundation of something far more powerful than a street crew. He had created a system of control rooted in silence, observation, and calculated fear, a system that was only just beginning to grow. The shift from small-scale street trading to a national network began when Nathan Cole entered the picture. Nathan was from Liverpool, but unlike many who grew up around the docks, he did not spend his days doing heavy labor. He worked in shipping administration, where he learned schedules, container routes, and which shipments were checked carefully, and which slipped through with minimal inspection. When Nathan lost his job after a workplace dispute, he did not return home broken. Instead, he went looking for opportunity. and he found it when he met a member of the Iron Street crew during a night out in Manchester. Nathan saw potential in Darius Finch's growing presence. The Iron Street crew was controlled, disciplined, and deliberate, unlike the loud and reckless groups Nathan had encountered before. He understood that if they gained access to shipping lanes, their operations could move from local theft to large-scale supply. Darius, who rarely formed quick alliances, took time to evaluate Nathan. He observed his manner, listened to what he knew, and considered how he spoke about risk. Nathan did not boast. He stated facts. He provided calm details about how goods traveled, where papers could be copied, and how unnoticed cargo could blend into containers filled with cheap imports. Once Nathan was accepted, the structure of the gang began to change. They no longer relied only on stolen electronics and street-level trade. Through Nathan's knowledge, they started smuggling small quantities of illegal goods using overlooked cargo shipments. The first few attempts were cautious. Only small amounts were moved, and they were always routed through different ports. When these shipments arrived successfully, confidence grew. The Iron Street crew reinvested every bit of profit back into expansion. They formed contacts with individuals in warehouses, transport depots, and delivery companies. Some of these people joined willingly for money. Others cooperated quietly out of fear. With each successful shipment, the network widened. Soon, it was no longer just East London benefiting. Distribution chains emerged in Manchester, Birmingham, and later Glasgow. Instead of fighting with existing local gangs, Darius offered them a choice: remain independent but receive goods at low cost, or resist and lose everything. Many chose cooperation. Those who did not either vanished or lost their territory overnight. Violence was rarely visible. Decisions were made in shadows, and consequences arrived without warning. The Iron Street crew became known not just for power, but for efficiency. They did not draw attention with street chaos or loud displays. Their influence spread quietly, which made them more dangerous. People who worked for them rarely understood the full network. Every task was broken into small roles. Drivers did not know other drivers. Warehouse workers never saw the suppliers. Collectors never knew how much product existed. This structure prevented leaks and confusion. It was organized like a machine. Meanwhile, talk on the streets shifted. Young recruits admired the wealth, clothes, and cars that members of the crew displayed. They saw the Iron Street crew as something beyond crime, something like a hidden empire operating inside everyday life. Shops opened, nightclubs changed ownership, and certain neighborhoods felt watched without ever seeing who was watching. Darius had once been a quiet observer, standing on worn pavement outside old buildings. Now, without raising his voice or attracting unnecessary attention, he controlled a network that spanned cities. The Iron Street crew was no longer local. It had become a national force, and the country had not yet realized how deeply it had already been infiltrated. ChatGPT said, as the Iron Street crew continued to grow, their operations became larger and more layered, but with expansion came internal pressure. The structure Darius Finch had built relied on quiet obedience and disciplined control. Everyone knew their place, and nothing moved without Darius approving it. However, not everyone was satisfied with that system. One of the younger members, Rafe Mercer, had climbed the ranks quickly because of his confidence and fearlessness. He was bold, ambitious, and admired by newer recruits who saw him as a symbol of success. His influence among the younger members slowly developed into something more significant than Darius anticipated. Kane believed that the crew had the potential to expand even faster, and he did not like the cautious, strategic patience that Darius practiced. Kane wanted instant gains, louder power, and visible dominance. He did not understand that the strength of the Iron Street crew came from being unseen, from moving quietly through shadows. Kane's ambition clouded his judgment. He began arranging deals on the side, making contacts with suppliers and smaller gangs without informing Darius. He convinced himself that he was not betraying the crew, only improving it. But each decision he made without approval weakened the internal structure that held everything together. The first signs of division were subtle. Money from a few deliveries was less than expected. A warehouse that was always tightly supervised went quiet for a full night. A recruiter who usually reported everything began holding back details. Darius noticed these changes. He never reacted emotionally. He simply observed. He watched Kane's behavior shift, noticed who spent time around him, and took note of sudden confidence displayed by people who previously stayed silent. The gang was still functioning, but the trust that had once moved through it effortlessly had begun to fracture. Kane's growing influence led him to form a small but fiercely loyal subgroup inside the crew. These were younger members who believed that Kane represented a new era. They admired his boldness more than Darius's quiet, steady leadership. Kane encouraged this admiration, feeding their belief that the Iron Street crew had slowed down under careful leadership. To the younger recruits, fast success felt more powerful than stable control. They wanted to see their dominance recognized on the streets, not hidden behind business deals and silent partnerships. This internal shift did not go unnoticed by outside forces. A violent gang in Leeds, known for rapid attacks and unpredictable retaliation, became aware of Kane through the loud members around him. Kane, eager to prove his value and expand faster, began making arrangements with them, believing he could manage them as easily as he managed his loyal supporters. What he didn't realize was that the Leeds gang saw him not as a partner, but as an opening. They viewed his ambition as a weakness that could be manipulated to undermine Darius's quiet empire. The balance that had made the Iron Street crew strong was now disrupted. The foundations once built on silence, order, and carefully controlled influence began to shift. A divide had formed inside the gang, not from police interference or rival attacks, but from within. The most dangerous threat to the Iron Street crew was no longer outside their walls. It was developing at the center of their own structure, growing quietly, fueled by ego, impatience, and the hunger for power. The tension inside the Iron Street crew reached a quiet but dangerous peak. Darius Finch understood that Kane Mercer's influence had grown beyond simple disobedience. Kane's small unit inside the crew had become its own internal faction, one that believed a shift of power was coming. But Darius did not respond with open confrontation. He never relied on loud threats or aggressive displays. Instead, he began to isolate Kane piece by piece, removing his support without the crew even realizing it was happening. The first step was financial. Darius controlled all distribution quietly through trusted intermediaries who never appeared in public. By redirecting certain shipments and payments, he ensured that Kane's operations began to suffer small losses. Nothing large enough to raise immediate suspicion, but enough to cause frustration. Members under Kane started noticing that profits were no longer matching their efforts. Doubts began to emerge, and loyalty that had seemed unshakable started to weaken. People in the criminal world did not stay loyal to ambition if ambition stopped paying. Next, Darius targeted trust. Certain individuals who had been close to Kane were approached privately and reminded of how dangerous it was to stand against the original leader. These reminders were subtle. A car parked outside a house for too long. A familiar face appearing in a quiet street at night. A message delivered without a sender. People understood. Fear did not need to speak. One by one, they began distancing themselves from Kane, always quietly, without confrontation. Then came the final step. Darius allowed Kane to believe he still had control. Kane continued to push forward with plans for expansion, unaware that each move was being watched and predicted. He believed he was gaining momentum. He believed Darius was weakening. But in reality, every person Kane trusted had already shifted back to Darius in silence. When Darius was ready, he chose a single night to resolve everything. It was a cold evening when Kane returned to one of his hideouts, a warehouse that had once been a central meeting space for his unit. He believed he was going there to finalize a new deal with the gang from Leeds. Instead, he walked into a space that had already been emptied of his supporters. No one waited for him. No deals, no allies, no backup, only silence. What happened inside that warehouse remained unknown to the outside world. No one heard shouting. No one reported violence. No one claimed to have seen Darius or any other member enter. The warehouse lights stayed off. But by morning, Kane Mercer was gone. His belongings were cleared out, his contacts disconnected, and his name was erased from every part of the crew's operations. Members understood the message immediately. There was only one leader. There was no room for division. The crew moved forward as though nothing had happened. Kane's existence became something people avoided mentioning, not from fear of punishment, but because his absence spoke louder than anything words could express. The Iron Street crew remained intact, not through open war, but through quiet and precise control. Darius had shown that betrayal would not be confronted. It would be erased. And that silence made him more feared than any weapon ever could.
Tension in the city had reached a breaking point. Rumors about the gang's next move were spreading like wildfire, leaving residents terrified to step outside after dark. Camden's streets, once lively with markets and music, now felt like a ghost town. Even the faintest sound of a car engine or a slammed door made hearts race. The gang had become invisible predators, striking without warning and leaving no evidence behind. Witnesses who had previously seen their faces were either too scared to speak or had vanished mysteriously. Law enforcement was stretched thin, chasing shadows while the gang continued to grow bolder. One night, under the cover of darkness, the gang carried out a meticulously planned heist that stunned everyone. A luxury jewelry store in central London was emptied in minutes. Security cameras showed nothing. Either the lenses had been expertly disabled or someone inside had helped them. Authorities found no fingerprints, no footprints, nothing to lead them to the criminals. The public was shaken. How could a gang operate with such precision and impunity in one of the busiest cities in the world? Fear and fascination mixed in equal measure. Among the gang, a figure emerged who was both admired and feared. A man named Rafe Sinclair. Rafe had joined the gang only a year ago, but his talent for planning and executing crimes made him indispensable. Rumors suggested he had studied criminal operations across Europe and used his knowledge to outsmart even the most experienced detectives. His ability to predict police movements and manipulate situations had earned him a reputation as nearly untouchable. Unlike others who craved recognition, Rafe stayed in the shadows, orchestrating chaos with careful calculation. Yet, cracks began to appear within the gang. Rivalries, jealousy, and the constant pressure of evading law enforcement started to take their toll. A minor mistake during a smuggling operation almost led to arrests, and tempers flared. The cohesion that had once made them unstoppable was beginning to unravel. Members who had been loyal to the core started questioning decisions, whispering doubts behind closed doors. Rafe, sensing the instability, knew he had to act decisively to maintain control. A shocking twist came when an anonymous tip led police to a hidden warehouse on the outskirts of Birmingham. Investigators found evidence of stolen goods from multiple cities, but the gang members themselves had vanished. It seemed almost impossible. How could such a high-profile network leave no trace, not even a single person to question? Authorities were left with more questions than answers, and the media frenzy only fueled the gang's notoriety. Stories of their audacity dominated newspapers and television broadcasts, painting them as the most dangerous criminals in the UK. By the end of the chapter, it became clear that Rafe's intelligence and the gang's ruthlessness were unmatched, but the tension between loyalty and ambition hinted at future conflicts. The city waited, breath held, for the next move in a game that seemed to have no rules. Everyone knew one thing for certain. The gang's shadow was spreading, and no one, not even the police, felt safe anymore. The line between hunter and hunted had blurred, and the stakes had never been higher.
The gang's reign of fear had reached its peak, and the country watched in silent dread, unsure who would be next. London's streets were quieter than ever, with businesses closing early and residents moving cautiously through the shadows. Rafe Sinclair had become a name whispered in every corner of the UK, the mastermind whose strategies seemed untouchable. Yet, even the most calculated plans have a weakness, and this night would prove it. The gang planned their boldest heist yet, a shipment of cash being transferred from a high-security armored truck in Manchester. It was the kind of operation that could either cement their legend or destroy them entirely. Rafe had studied every angle the truck's route, police patrols, traffic cameras, and even the timing of streetlights. Everything seemed flawless, the kind of plan that promised success without mistakes. The members moved like shadows, silent and precise, and for hours it appeared they might succeed where no one else could. But unknown to them, law enforcement had been quietly building a case for months. Detective Isla Mercer had pieced together clues that everyone else had overlooked. Small anomalies, patterns in thefts, and whispers from informants led her to anticipate the gang's move. She positioned officers discreetly along the route, ready to strike at the exact moment. The plan was risky one misstep, and the gang could disappear like they always did. The tension was unbearable, every second stretching like hours. As the armored truck approached its rendezvous point, the gang made their move. Rafe directed from a distance, signaling each member with hand gestures and radio signals. Everything seemed perfect. The crew overpowered the truck's security with uncanny efficiency. Bags of cash were loaded into waiting vehicles, and they began their escape. But then, in a sudden and unexpected twist, police vehicles emerged from hidden positions. Rafe's heart raced. He had never anticipated someone outsmarting him at this level. Chaos erupted. Tires screeched, engines roared, and for the first time, fear crept into the gang's calculated precision. Shots were fired, though no one was seriously hurt. Panic set in, and the gang scattered. Rafe realized that his empire of fear, built over years, could unravel in moments. Members were captured or fled into the night, leaving behind the carefully planned loot. He had underestimated the determination of those who had refused to be intimidated. For the first time, he felt vulnerable, the consequences of his choices pressing down like never before. In the aftermath, the UK breathed a cautious sigh of relief. Media outlets declared the gang's reign over, though whispers persisted about those who had escaped, lurking in the shadows. Rafe Sinclair was nowhere to be found, a ghost once again, leaving authorities to wonder if this was truly the end or merely a pause before another chapter of fear. The streets slowly came back to life, but the memory of the gang's audacity remained, a reminder of how close danger had come to ordinary lives. Even as the city moved forward, the legend of Britain's most dangerous gang lived on. Their story became a warning. Intelligence, ruthlessness, and unpredictability can make anyone powerful, but even the most feared criminals are not invincible. The game of shadows had ended, for now, but the echoes of fear would linger long after the night was gone.